Good afternoon, everybody. You know, small is beautiful. We are not counting the heads. We only know that experts are sitting in the room. And it's most important for our discussion. I welcome all of you, and my name is Volker Termühlen. My background is medicine. My specialty in medicine is pediatrics and infectious diseases, and I'm the president of the Inter-Academy Partnership, the Global Network of Science Academies. We have this afternoon a very interesting topic. And the topic is the ethics of regenerative medicine. And those of you who have participated yesterday at noontime in this session on genome editing and the use of genome editing in changing germline or germ cell properties have realized the tremendous progress made in molecular biology, in cell molecular biology, which is usable in medicine. And this is something which has given hope for many people. On the other hand, this is something which is scary if it is not done in the proper way. And so there is a big discussion going on, of course, in medicine, in the group of ethics, outside medicine, within medicine, and also, of course, in molecular biology. How far can we go? I mean, we can do many, many things, but it is really a responsible way in which we do this. And if we see how it is used now in regular medicine, we know that in hematology we can really cure certain diseases. This is fantastic what has been established. We also can treat certain skin diseases with these techniques. But these techniques and the isolation of stem cells and using stem cells is also something which is used now just for making business. And this is a broad field in which we have to try to give direction. And the European Academy Science Advisory Council, as well as the Federation of European Medical Academies, have come together and have established a working group on this issue. And we are working on this topic, and we are in the process of probably next year in the spring have a report ready and can publish it. But we will use this opportunity here to discuss with you who have interest in the topic, the difficulties, the progress, and what one has to really observe. So we have a group of, I think, 6 experts. We have one professor from Sweden, Professor Hermeron, who is the one who is a professor for medical ethics, and he will give us, I think, the broad background which we all have to listen carefully so that we behave properly, right? So we start with Robin Fierce. I think I don't have to introduce him because you know him. He is a program director of ESAC. He's the backbone for everything what we are doing, and Robin will introduce the topic to you and will give some direction, and then we start. And after Robin, we have Göran Hermanen, who will talk about ethics, and then we will see how we can bring everything together with having a panel, and the panel will discuss them and present something, and at the end we will have a general discussion. I hope you all will participate. Thank you. Robin, please.
Thank you, Volker. I feel I've been living in this room for a couple of days now, but I'm very pleased to see you all. I'm Robin Fierce, Director of the Bioscience Program at ESAC, and it's my task to give you a little bit of background to the presentations you'll be hearing in the rest of the session. If we can find my slides. No. They were there. Yeah, RF. Yeah. Okay, so as I mentioned, this work is currently, it's work in progress, and it's currently being conducted by the European Academies of Science and Medicine. But I think we can agree by the end of today that the issues are of global importance. And just for final introductory remark, our working group has been significantly supported by scientists from the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. So we take this opportunity to thank the Academy for very strong support for this project. Okay, I'm not an expert in regenerative medicine, So I will leave it to some of my colleagues to go into further detail as we progress. But essentially, it's regenerative medicine is a rather general title for a number of different approaches, essentially aiming to repair or restore cell function. It's interdisciplinary, bringing together a number of techniques from biological, clinical, engineering sciences. It's advancing very fast, both in terms of the science and also in terms of the business models and the regulatory implications. Despite that fast growth, so far it's shown great promise, but clinical proof of principle has been confined to relatively few specific indications, particularly skin and blood disorders. But the promise for the future is enormous, and the science is very exciting. In terms of the ethical issues that we will address this afternoon, I won't say a lot, but I would just raise the question to begin with: does regenerative medicine raise new issues or accentuate issues we're already familiar with? But this figure is taken from the report that we will publish in a few months. It depicts, very simply, two of the main approaches, stem cell therapy and gene therapy. That our report focuses mainly on stem cell therapy for the very good reason that stem cell research is a particular strength across the European Union, and clearly the issues for stem cell innovation and commercialisation are important to the European Union, but we feel that a lot of the conclusions and messages that we are developing with regard to the case study of stem cells are generalisable more broadly in regenerative medicine, so we can come back to discussion about it later on. Okay, so the current project, and it is work in progress, is a joint activity between ESAC, National Science Academies of the EU, and FEAM, Academies of Medicine and medical sections of other academies. We as organisations have worked together at several occasions on the past with complementary activities, and essentially the value of working together on this topic is to bring a fairly broad range of skills from clinical medicine, biological sciences, and expertise with regard to issues for the regulatory authorities and others involved in managing the framework for regulation, science and innovation in this area and the consequences for society. But very briefly, these are the issues that we are covering in our draft report, and you'll hear more about some of these. We describe the science, we describe some of the issues for both the preclinical and clinical science, particularly with regard to quality of the evidence base and what we need to do to improve that. In our report, we also describe issues and concerns about regulatory frameworks. Essentially, the regulatory framework for regenerative medicine is often crafted in a different way to other medicines. In some countries around the world, there are specific accelerated procedures only for regenerative medicine. Clearly that creates a certain competitive pressure on the EU, whether the EU should match those singular regulatory frameworks or not. There is in our view, potential consequence of accelerated regulation. Of course, it brings the medicines to the patient quicker, that's great, but it may be on a relatively small evidence base for efficacy and safety. And also, the rather abbreviated regulatory system that we have for regenerative medicine can be seen additionally as tempting to unscrupulous clinics, essentially to try to sell products with rather or no evidence to patients who are desperate for a cure. So there's a number of issues there, and obviously some of those issues are very significant in terms of their ethical implications, Again, it's work in progress. We are crafting our recommendations, and our working group meets, I think, for the last time next week. So we've not yet finalised our messages and our recommendations, but certainly our recommendations will be directed to policymakers in Europe, to regulatory authorities in Europe and the member states, and also to patients and the public, to explain what some of the misconceptions may be, to be wary of commercial offerings, to understand that informed consent is at the core of the issues. But there are other aspects that we cover in our report, for example, to better inform medical education, to better inform journal publication practices, and indeed to better inform health services, so that our health services themselves can be part of a research and innovation in this area. Okay, I'll finish with this slide just to re-emphasize a couple of things. Is there something special about regenerative medicine, or in fact do the issues resonate with other medical innovation? We can discuss that in the discussion perhaps. How can we balance the legitimate desires for innovation and European competitiveness in this area with the need for patient protection and patient information? The issues are of global importance, so what is the role and the responsibility of the EU to lead the debate globally? Our overarching theme for the World Science Forum is ethics and responsibility. What is the responsibility for the scientific community and for policymakers in the EU at a global level? And in the context of our ongoing work, what more should the academies do? We're nearing completion of our report, but here indeed is the opportunity for you to provide further guidance on how we might finalise our work. So I'll stop there and hand over to Gora. Yeah, okay, sorry.
Robin, thank you. We continue. Goran, please come. This is your turn now. And as I said, he comes from the University of Lund and is a professor for medical ethics. And I think medicine needs this, and they need you with all the information you have, which you will tell us.
Thank you, Walter. We leave something for the obituary. Thank you for your kind introduction. I will say something about the ethics of regenerative medicine, and this is an overview of what I'm going to talk about. So first, a few words about the stage. And Robin provided the context, the areas that the report covers. I will focus on a more limited area, namely the ethical aspects. And I begin by reminding you that things are not static. New research questions are being developed, new research methods are being used. And you can see on this question, to take a specific example to avoid generalities, should experimentally generated self-organizing embryonic tissues be treated in the same way as human embryos? This, of course, raises a lot of questions about the 14-day rule. And as you can see in the last sentence of the quote, modeling human embryogenesis in a dish opens up new possibilities for research, but of course it also raises a lot of tough ethical issues. And if we take a historical view of the landscape since 2000, you can see that the things have changed. If we look at the past issues, the present issues, the future issues, if we look at basic research, translational research, clinical research. When we began in the European Group on Ethics working on this, the moral status of the embryo was the key issue. Now we have many other much more specific issues on the agenda. Also on the to set the stage, I want to remind you about ethical problems. They presuppose conflicts of interest in a wide non-technical sense. And this way of approaching ethics, I think, is useful because it reminds us that we should not only consider which interests are at stake, but also whose interests are at stake. And the interest can then be further specified in different ways in terms of values, rights, liberties, obligations, and so on. And a common feature of most developments in regenerative medicine is the many uncertainties and knowledge gaps, and they have implications for the ethical issues, which I'm going to talk about. Now, the next part of my talk will be about stakeholders and their interests. And an overview of the stakeholders and their interests is the beginning. That provides a basis for any normative discussion about what should be permitted, praised, or prohibited. So we need to identify the stakeholders, we need to find out what they want, to avoid what they want to achieve. But of course, this can be done by empirical research, but this empirical research does not solve the normative issues. We'll have to come back to, because not all interests are legitimate, not all interests need to be honored. So we need to come back to that. And of course, the list of stakeholders is long, as you can see on this slide. Present patients, future patients, relatives and families, physicians, clinics, healthcare services, medical journals, those in the product supply chain, and so on, and so on. And this is a picture I took in Greece once. And you can see there are two people in the picture. One is standing on top of the hill, watching out for a boat to come and pick him up. And this little girl, she's interested in the fish near her feet. They are both in the same landscape, but they see very different things. And this, of course, can be applied to academia, industry, to those concerned with patient protection and product innovation, those interested in global issues or local issues. And it's not always simple to identify the interest of the stakeholders for the very simple reasons that each group is not homogeneous. Patients want different things sometimes. And the same applies to regulators or researchers in different countries. And there are a number of values underpinning the interest of the stakeholders. They want certain things because they want to achieve certain good things, certain values. And taking the general framework suggested by the US National Academies as a starting point, you can see that there is a variety of values which could be hidden by using general terms. And you have my comments in italics. Promote societal value. But which are the societal values? They need to be specified. Minimize negative societal impact, which also needs to be specified. Protect the interest of research participants if they cannot protect themselves. Advance the interest of patients, though these may differ, and so on and so on. If we want to make any progress, we need to be somewhat more specific, because then we can see where we clash, where we have different views, and think about how to deal with that. I move on to what I think is a way of picturing the landscape. In an ethical issue, I think it's important and very useful to put it in a context using four different concepts. The present situation, where are we? The goals, where do we want to be? The obstacles, what difficulties are there on the road between the present situation and the goals? And how do we deal with the difficulties? And so we applied, this is a simplified picture of the situation. You have the present situation to your left, and then you have the goals to the right, and you have various difficulties or obstacles in between. And the challenge is, of course, to get around the obstacles and arrive at the goals, or come closer to the goals. This is a simplified pictures because there are more descriptions, more than one description of the present situation, more than one goal, and the goals are very different. I mean, promote health. If there are 13 definitions of health, we have 13 goals. And quality of life, I don't want to go into the definitions of quality of life, but the same thing applies. The point of distinguishing between different obstacles, different difficulties, is that they need to be tackled in different ways. Money is not always the only solution. It could be a problem, lack of money, but if there are attitudes, you need something else than money. If there are legal obstacles, you need to go to Parliament and lobby for a change in the regulations. So the overarching goals, in order to arrive at an ethically acceptable conclusions in the long-range interest of all stakeholders involved, we need a robust scientific basis, along with values that are debated, clarified, specified, and ranked in importance. So this means that we have two overarching goals. The first is better scientific evidence, more better scientific knowledge, and more robust value base. Regulations ideally are secondary to this because they ideally are based on evidence and values that are agreed on in society. Now, I will not say much about the knowledge-related goals because I will focus on ethics. I will just point out the connection between some of the knowledge-related goals and ethics. And if the general aim is to improve the quality of the evidence base, this is also an ethical obligation. And why? Simply because poor quality science can harm patients and undermine trust in serious research. So more rigorous research is needed, including carefully designed and conducted clinical trials. Of course, this is expensive and requires funding and things like that, which are discussed in the report. So I won't go into that. I will focus on the value-related goals and on the ethical aspects. And again, to avoid generalities, I will begin with a concrete example and hope that this will help you think about the issues. This project is investigating a novel stem cell therapy for severe osteogenesis imperfecta, which is a currently untreatable and severe genetic condition whereby affected fetuses and children develop life-threatening skeletal pathology, brittle bones. Very, very difficult condition. And the potential therapeutic stem cell-based intervention will be to give individuals affected by severe osteogenesis imperfecta stem cells either to fetuses or to infants. And this study also involves pregnant women who agree to donate fetal tissues for the isolation of fetal liver-derived mesenchymal stem cells used for the intervention. And only fetuses or infants most severely affected by OI will be eligible to take part in the study. Now I talk fast in order to make you see immediately what the ethical issues are, but here they come. What are the risks of miscarriage or harm to the fetus? We're talking about prenatal and postnatal transplantation of stem cells here. What are the risks of miscarriage or harm to the fetus? What are the therapeutic benefits? How certain are they? Who should weigh risks against benefits? Who decides? Who may veto in view of the many uncertainties? What are the responsibilities of the various stakeholders involved? What efforts should be made to ensure free and informed consent? By whom? From whom? And against this example, so the list of ethical issues listed in the report is not surprising. You can see the list here: safety and efficacy, patient consent, information, sources, professional responsibilities, equity and fairness. And of course these are very general terms and refer to good things. Safety is a good thing, efficacy is a good thing, equity is a good thing, and so on. I will begin by saying something about risk and uncertainty, because I think risk-benefit analysis is key here. And the standard concept of risk has two components. The one is a probability of a certain outcome, and the second component is a negative evaluation of this outcome. Otherwise, you can't distinguish between chance and risk. And so two persons can agree on the probability of a certain outcome, but disagree on the evaluation of it, and vice versa. So the risk is a complicated concept, and this has implications for safety levels, because here there is an intriguing interplay between science and values. So when you take a decision that the risk is worth taking, this decision is also based on values. And you can see that very clearly by considering the second point. A high safety level favors some at the expense of others. You don't expose others to risks. But a low safety level exploits others, present patients, for example, and may benefit future patients. So where do you put the level of safety? Here or here? That has ethical or value implications. Now I want to comment on some of the concepts in the list of of ethical issues. And assessing the efficacy and safety of a treatment is a challenge when there's limited research evidence and little or no clinical experience of use. And this, of course, as you can see in the last sentence here, makes it very difficult to estimate the likelihood of adverse events. So that's the implication for ethics. And patient consent, the rapid development of research, the uncertainties and the knowledge gaps, the difficulty to foresee future uses of obtained data, donated cells and tissues, have started a discussion of different forms of consent, where one distinction is between opt-in and opt-out. Opt-in, if you haven't said yes, you have said no. If opt-out, if you haven't said no, you have said yes. But there are also other forms that are being discussed, and I mentioned some of them here. Broad consent, it's a consent model that allows for current and future uses, future access and use of samples or data for research without necessarily specifying what the focus of such studies might be. So you say yes to future research involving this or that, but you don't know what kind of research that would cover. Tiered consent, the consent model in which participants are given a set of options allowing them to select how they want to participate in the research. And dynamic consent, a consent model in which participants are able to alter their preferences over time. Very important, the last point. The extent to which regulatory and oversight committees would accept these new consent models is still not clear. And I think we would face many difficulties there at the present time. So that's why this is an ongoing discussion where you need to argue for if you want to change from opt-in to some of these other models, you need to argue for that. Information, the other part of informed consent. Information sources need to be critically assessed, but not only the sources. We discussed that in the report, but also the contents of the information is important. And it's essential that the information provided is not only accessible, but correct, understandable, and not misleading. Every statement in the information could be true and correct, but if you make a selection of facts, then it could be misleading even if every statement is true. So you need to check that. And of course, the challenge to achieve this is often underestimated, and the difficulties are well known from research in the social sciences and the behavioral sciences. There are other challenges. One of them is to control the information, since much is available on social media and internet for those interested, and also to counteract therapeutic misconception, the idea that there's some therapeutic advantage of participating in a research project. Now, equity and fairness, who pays, who provides, to whom? Now, patient access to experimental treatment is unequal and limited by substantial costs. And this is, of course, a problem for patients, their families, and health services. Moreover, since resources are limited, if you use them for a certain purpose, you cannot use them for some other purpose. So we have a priority setting discussion that needs to take place. Now, there is an interesting relation between these issues, which in my view is like this. Risk-benefit analysis is key. I think information presupposes risk-benefit analysis, because you inform about the risk, you inform about the benefits. Consent presupposes information, because you have the consent you give is relative to the information you have received and what you have understood of that information. And equity and fairness, of course, comes later. And then when you ask yourself who can deal with these issues most efficiently, most effectively, that is the basis for conclusions about the responsibility of the various stakeholders. Researchers have certain responsibilities, others have other responsibilities. Okay, now I said something about this, where we are, I said something about the goals. Now I say something about the difficulties and the strategies, the ways to deal with the goals. Now, if safety, efficacy, patient consent, equity and fairness are what we want to promote, what are the particular difficulties or obstacles? I mentioned some already. It's easy to underestimate the difficulties of obtaining an informed consent when there are so many uncertainties and knowledge gaps. But there are some other difficulties which are discussed in the report, which I will bring to your attention. And one of them is the direct-to-consumer marketing of unapproved stem cell treatments. And unregulated, unproven paid-to-participate therapies can harm patients and serious research. And there's been a lot of discussion about this. And the FDA, the Federal Drug Authority in the US, have warned certain companies for their illegal marketing. You can read about that on the internet. I had a picture of the company here, but I don't want to be chased by an army of lawyers, so I took it away. But you can find that in the internet very easily. And there are some other specific difficulties. And one of them, which is mentioned towards the end of the ISAC report, is this. And I would welcome input on this particular issue because it's quite difficult. Tissue and cell regulation, as you know, is based on the principles of altruistic donation. You give you don't sell your tissues, you don't sell your cells. And then we have commercialization of donated biological material. Once it becomes classified as a medicinal product, then you need to address this challenge because you give it away freely and then some others make money on what you have given freely. And it has to be very clear who gets paid for doing what, under what conditions. And the values at stake here, fairness, transparency, and of course, ideally global consensus because the market is international, the market is global. So you need to, it's not enough that in the EU or in certain countries in the EU, you agree on this because there are other places where things can happen. So, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Göran, for this wonderful overview. I'm sure that there are questions, but keep them for the end, where we will discuss everything. And I think we continue with the next presentation, which is done by Professor Ankambon Thompson from France, and she's a medical doctor specialized in human immunogenetics and health ethics. Take a seat.
That's right. Yeah. That's it. Okay, thank you very much. And I would like first to thank the organizers of this session to have me here addressing you and participate in a very interesting discussion. So there are many reasons why I could be here for different activities in relation with the topic of the World Science Forum, but I will concentrate in my domain on what is in red on this slide, which are my activities in relation to the EU policies and being presently a member of the European Group on Ethics of Science and New Technologies. And I was a member when Göran was the president there, and that was a very interesting period. So I will address a number of aspects quite quickly. First, some introductory things. And I want first to say that it's true for regenerative medicine as for other domains. We are facing what can be called the evidentiary time lag. That is that we need to make decisions and regulations. And it's new technologies. The specificity of regenerative medicine is very often, and specifically now with a number of technology in studying and manipulating the cells and the genome, it's not only a product that has to be used, it's also a technique. So technique and product together. So it depends, this decision, on many factors: technical availability and product availability, safety, we heard already about that. But also education of professionals, there are new processes. Public perception that has to be taken into the play. Adaptation of existing organization in the health system or in the institutions, and taking into account different stakeholders and their responsibilities. So whereas in research, I'm a researcher, in the research context, we are constantly bound to novelty and applications, and there, regenerative medicine, we talk about application in healthcare, often suffer from this evidentiary time lag. So what is it? Between the moment when the technology and the products seem to be ready to be used and applicable, and the moment when you have enough empirical data on what actually happens in reality when you are using these new treatments or technologies, there is a time period where you are in uncertainty. And there are questions that we are facing now, like what are the good practices? What are the actual advantages compared to the promises and the risks? What are the best and realistic guidelines to apply this? And what is the best way to share experience between people trying these new treatments and techniques? And deciding on a framework to apply these new techniques and drugs can be difficult. And this is summarized in this little curve, where you have the introduction of the technology, which is on the vertical axis here. And then you have the accumulation of evidence gathered to really know how to do it. And there is this gap between the red curve and the blue curve, and that's where we are for regenerative medicine, at least a number of examples of that. And talking about ethics, there is this complex we heard about previously in this conference, about ethicists and regulators who are considered as being either too negative or too late. When they are there with good regulation, then the stable door needs to be repaired, and then all the animals are already running around in the landscape. So how to make the equilibrium between all these. And for regenerative medicine, as in other domains, regulations and recommendation for the application are not yet stabilized because we are still in the experimental domain. So the question is, do we put the cart before the horse in a number of cases? Because we are pushed by patients, pushed by industry, pushed by hospitals, pushed by researchers. Many people push to use things. And when you have desperate patients, say, oh, maybe it's not completely tested, not completely ready, but we could use it as compassionate use. And this happens in regenerative medicine. So Europe now coming into play. Ethics at European level. You all know, or probably, that ethics is not within the competence of the European Union, but of the national member states. However, ethical debate is present across nearly all of the EU institutions, and there are a number of texts which rely on ethical value, like the Charter of Fundamental Rights, Human Rights and Ethical Values. There is this European group on ethics in science and new technologies that is counseling the European Commission, and there are a number of other places, I would say, where ethics is coming into play, but sometimes, as it is not an official competence, with other hats, like the protection, the quality, the safety, other hats than just ethical values. If you look at the production of the European Group on Ethics opinions, between 1998 and now, there are at least 11 where the use of stem cells in Europe were addressed for one question or another one. And Goran was mobilizing a number of these opinions. We also have, at the level of the Council of Europe, the convention, the Oviedo Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine, that actually impact on how we use also regenerative medicine. There are some ethical challenges. This is just some of them, and the previous talk has addressed many of them. Some challenge for Europe regarding regenerative medicine. The motto is patient's interest first. But who defines exactly and on which basis you are defining at European level the patient interest? And how are they themselves involved in defining what is their own interest? You need to have independent and evidence-based sources of information, which is different from the publicity. And they need to be promoted. And Europe has a role to play at that level. And then we have a specific direction in the European Commission, the DG Santé, where in the mission letter of the new commissioner, it's written that one of the priorities is to help ensure Europe has the supply of affordable medicines to meet its needs, and to support the European pharmaceutical industry. So you have the support to industry on one side, to ensure that it remains an innovator and world leader. So that's part of the mission of the commissioner on DG Santé. And you can see here, if you think of regenerative medicine, that we are addressing the provision of new medicine, the industry needs and interests, and at the same time the patient interest and the feasibility in health systems. So that is tricky, and I think in the year to come it will be not only one of the priorities but one of the challenges in this new European Commission. We have also to address what is medicine. We talk about regenerative medicine and enhancement. Where does stop medicine, care, and where does start enhancement? It's not that easy in a number of cases to define, and I think that is also one of the challenges. So for the moment, the European Group on Ethics, so I'm a member, work on with a broad scope on genome editing. I know there was a session yesterday, but genome editing can influence a number of the domains of regenerative medicine. So that's why I'm going to talk a little bit of that, although the opinion is not finished, so I can't report the results of that opinion. Genome editing, I think I jump over what it is, just to say one thing. Genome editing, the manipulation of the genome, has existed for quite a number of years, since the 80s, but since 2012 we have had a disruptive technical advance with CRISPR technology. And I will not go into more of that. One of the characteristics of this technique is its rapid dissemination. It's incredible that within 6 years, now it's 7, massive dissemination all over the world in many laboratories has happened. There were more than 9,000 studies published using this technology within 6 years, which is remarkable for a technology. So regarding humans, as we are talking about medicine, clinical trials are ongoing using this technology on different aspects. Some experiments were done on embryos, not for reproduction, until it happened in 2018 with an experience that shaked the world with the two twins being manipulated by a Chinese researcher. But I want to recall that that kind of technology is not too complicated, not too expensive, but to do it in embryos, to implant them, you need to have all a system around. So it's not a researcher alone. It's the fact that this has happened with all the context around that is a question. And then the risks, which are not really completely clarified yet. There are numerous initiatives to think about, not only about values and ethics, but also about technically speaking, and then there are reports, statements, guidelines of different kinds, more than 25 in just some years. regarding this technology. In 2016, there was a statement by the EGE which was calling, I'm going to finish soon, which was calling for a deeper opinion and debate about that. And it happened because now we are working on that, and this is an extract of the letter from the Commissaire Moedas, who asked the EGE to work on that. There are issues in somatic gene editing, that is the one important for regenerative medicine. Of course, on safety, efficacy, availability of other treatments, and justice and fair access are at the center of what is being discussed. And I think this comes probably in your report at different moments, and it's a key element. I would jump over the germ line because that's not the problem of that we are tackling here. So I just want to finish by saying that there are some common dimensions between regulation and ethics, and this is true for regenerative medicine, and this is specifically true for stem cells, where we have regulation at European level and ethics considerations. Science and ethics are intertwined. It's not that when science is finished, then we think about the ethics of application. It's all to be thought of from the start. And then there are a lot of demand and need about societal dialogue and debate. And I will just mention some elements of that article which appeared in 2017 in, I think, Nature Biotechnology, because also Hungary was explored in this domain, where 1,000 respondents in different countries and more in the US were asked about gene editing and their application. A number of things which are remarkable. Female respondents were more cautious than male respondents. So according to who you ask, you don't get the same answer. Support is always greater for treatment than for enhancement, but I already say that the limit is sometimes fuzzy. Therapy in the adults had many people being positive towards that, and prenatal therapy, less, 60%. And still there was 11 comments on prenatal enhancement as being positive. So 10% of people were considering this. So they all work to consider. So the elements of the debate we need for regenerative medicine and the new technology in regenerative medicine is a honest dialogue and inclusion of all the public in framing the decision making, whether we have people to decide, of course, their job and responsibility, ensuring the veracity of the information provided to the public, and there was some allusions to use and false promises that exist in this domain, ensuring clarity of regulation and of responsibilities, and the new technology mix up a number of domains that are regulated differently sometimes, so we need clarity for that. But we have to keep in mind, and that will be my last words, that there are variations, even within Europe, in ethical consideration and positioning. And we need to define well the levels where harmonization can or cannot be achieved. And for that, map of Europe, and you see there are differences in important things. The coffee is light in the north and very strong in the south. And the bread is very light in the west and dark in the east. And what do you drink? More or less, more wine in the south and more beer. So when there are fundamental differences like that for things more important of what you eat and what you drink, you cannot be surprised that there are also differences in the ethical debate, and that would be my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this nice overview. So we will continue. The next short presentation is by Professor Balthasar Sarkadi. He's a professor at the Semmelweis University here in Budapest, and an expert on membrane proteins, in particular in stem cell function.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to speak here, and we were asked to give you just a few slides for the discussion, so I would like to do that. And I'm originally a medical doctor working with cell biology, molecular biology, and especially with stem cells. And I am also the Hungarian delegate to the EMA Committee for Advanced Therapies. So I will show the aspects of a medical doctor who is involved in research and also sees the ethical background. So the main question, how do we obtain human stem cells? So there are the tissue-derived stem cells which are present in our body all the time, and they can be largely used for transplantation. There are the pluripotent stem cells, which were originally obtained from human embryos, but by now we can generate these kinds of pluripotent stem cells from any differentiated cells. And this is due to the work of about 12 years ago to Yamanaka, who first showed that you can have tissue-derived differentiated cells and reprogram them to undifferentiated pluripotent stem cells. So here is the eternal life and eternal use, because these are rejuvenated cells and they can be practically passaged for an indefinite times. So there are many methods to generate these human iPS cells, and I am just showing you that there are non-viral, viral methods, and even now we have numerous methods where we don't really modify the genome of the cells. So it's just a transient modification, like we remove the memory of a hard disk, but we keep the original hard disk, and it can regenerate the tissue in any kinds of cells. So we can already culture human embryonic or human iPS cells. They can go indefinitely. We can produce a lot of these cells, and we can differentiate them into various tissues like hematopoietic tissues, or even neurons, or even cardiac cells. So these cells can be practically widely used for any tissue regeneration, and we can generate them from blood cell fibroblasts. We can use them with non-integrating methods like the Sendai virus, and we can do gene editing very rapidly in these stem cells, which are originally made in the pluripotent stem cells, but they are kept for a long time in any differentiated cells. Now here comes the regulation. How do we regulate the processes which can lead to the use of these stem cells in medical therapy? In Europe, we have a common committee, the Committee for Advanced Therapies, and actually all these cell therapies are centrally regulated in the US. And the advantage of this way is that there is a central kind of well-defined regulation. But the other not so friendly aspect is that they want to regulate all these therapies like drugs, because they are coming from the pharmaceutical industry. And when we are sitting in this committee, like medical doctors or research personnel, we are fighting the regulators. And of course it's a good fight, because we can end up with products which are really valuable. And of course there are major challenges with stem cells in this committee, that they are not really drugs, they are independent cells, but they still need quality management and the defined products, good starting materials, GMP manufacturing processes. So we all have to agree what we have to keep and what we can forget in the case of human stem cells. Like most of the animal experiments can be forgotten because they are not appropriate for studying the effects of human stem cells. And now here comes the enemy, the unapproved, unauthorized stem cell therapies, which are present all over the world and even in larger quantities. And in the US, it became very prominent. There are more than 200 clinics which offer stem cell treatment, and now the FDA starts to regulate or wants to regulate, and it's not very easy. And we can get to the kind of stem cell McDonald's with stem box. And that's a dangerous process, so the EMA and the CATS and all the medicinal agencies and even the academies are trying to stop this kind of process, the stem cell tourism, but it is present also in Hungary and all over the world, and I think it's a very dangerous process, and we have to become somewhere rational in supporting real scientific approach and stopping this all kinds of treatments. And that's my final slide, that we are on a very good track. We can do a lot, but please be patient for a while until we can really use them in human therapy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this good view into the situation you have described. The next is Professor Beata Sperler from Hungary, and she is the director and head of the Department of Pharmacology and Laboratory, also of the Semmelweis University.
Thank you. And first of all, I have to admit that I'm neither a deep expert in ethics nor in regenerative medicine, but I would like to represent here a view of a medical professional who is actively involved in finding new therapies and also involved in drug development. And I will also use the report of IASAC in my presentation. So, because this forum is about ethic, science and responsibility, at first let's remind you the basic ethical principles of medicine, which are attributed to Hippocrates, and maybe you find old, although these are still valid, and these are the principles which guide the decision of every physician of every kind of therapies. These are autonomy, beneficence, justice, and the best implicated, the non-maleficence, the nil nocere principle, which form the basis of the concept of the safety, and of course the patient has the right for dignity, they have the right for the full and honest information.
Your voice is strong enough without.
Yes, to speak out now. So,
Leave this.
okay, and finally for privacy. And medicine has been, for a long time, has been divided rather sharply to two branches, the non-operative medicine, such as internal medicine, basically relying on pharmacotherapy, which are supplemented with various means of
Speak without. Right?
these new branches of medicine can be regarded as a therapeutic output of these new emerging sciences, such as gene therapy is the therapeutic output of genomic and genetics, and cell therapy is the therapeutic output of cell biology. Although cell therapy is not new, just think on the blood transfusion, which is also a form of cell therapy. However, a new era of cell therapy has started when stem cells were discovered, having these cells the capacity to be transferred to other cell types and giving an unprecedented opportunity for the replacement and regeneration of other cell types. So here the point I would like to emphasize that the huge difference between the complexity level of the traditional pharmacotherapy and regenerative medicine, whereas in case of pharmacotherapy, usually single, small or large molecule biochemical or biological entities are applied to target well-defined single molecular targets and to obtain a well-defined change in a biological function, whereas in case of gene therapy, engineered DNA and RNA are delivered using sophisticated viral vector to ensure specificity, and the goal is to obtain long-term changes not only on the level of gene transcription, but also translation and synthesis of distinct proteins. And in case of cell therapy, factories of thousands of different chemical entities are introduced to the host organism, and the therapeutic response also highly depends on the host environment. So nevertheless, in the past years, really, we witnessed a boom of the regenerative medicine, and now there are many approved gene and cell therapies by the FDA, but also partly by the EMA. And it's not surprising that these therapies are mainly target genetic disorder, but also hematological disorder, and the most promising approach seems to be the combination of gene and cell therapy. And the other common feature of these therapies is that they usually target small number of patients, but in the same time they are extremely expensive due to the high development cost. And here I can mention a positive example. A few weeks ago, first Hungarian gene therapy case was produced. A 2-year-old boy, Zente, has been received therapy called Zolgensma. This is first gene therapy for spinal muscular atrophy. And this therapy cost more than 2 million euro. However, with a crowdfunding campaign, the family was able to collect money. And for a country like Hungary, which is a middle-income country, this is a good example. We don't have a very strong tradition in charities and donations for health purposes, and maybe this case was followed by another case when another boy received. But the ideal situation would be that all over the world, every patient who needs this therapy would get this very new breakthrough therapy. And as you can see, the incidence of these disorders is rather uneven all over the world, and I wonder when, for the first time, African children will get this therapy. So further emerging ethical challenges are there on case of regenerative medicine on the side of safety, truthfulness, and honesty. And we have already heard about the stem cell tourism. Tourism is not new, it is happening for decades. However, the rapid progress on the regenerative field, on the science, And the permissive regulation encouraged also those approaches which try to commercialize the magic word stem cell with unjustified scientific background. And also commented in the Nature that, for instance, in Japan, the permissive regulation allowed to approve stem cell therapy without the publication of any kind of clinical evidence. And the example of this mesenchymal cell stem cell debate also illustrate that even the scientific community can be misled between the wide gap between the expectation and the reality. So finally, just tell a few words about the challenges on the regulatory framework. Here I should raise the question whether regenerative medicine and advanced therapy medicinal products, which include cell therapy and gene therapy, really deserve to be treated distinctively compared with the traditional medicine, which has to go through a very rigorous preclinical and clinical procedure to get the market authorization, whether in case of this product there is a centralized, simplistic, and lower-cost procedure, which encourages, of course, this is good, and in certain measures, such as the conditional approval, it is suitable because there are not so many patients in this case to perform large clinical trials. And fast-track approval is also suitable when there is an intractable disorder. However, as a take-home message, my opinion is also that a more permissive regulation makes more difficult to differentiate between useful, useless, and harmful medical procedure that potentially weaken the trust in science. Maybe not everybody shares this opinion here, but probably this is because I am a woman and more cautious than the men. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we come to the last presentation. This is by Elisa Corritore. She is a policy officer at the FEAM office in Brussels, and she finished a PhD on this issue. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I would like to start my few slides, so my 5 minutes contribution by thanking the organizer of these sessions, which is really interesting, in particular Dr. Robin Fears from ESAC, which we had been working jointly for this, for writing down this statement on regenerative medicine. My name is Elisa Corritore, and I'm Forum Policy Officer working at the Federation European Academies of Medicine. I'm not going in the details about what the Federation does, since Dr. Robin Fears already provided an overview on this, but I just would like briefly to highlight the fact that I'm the responsible of the forum, which is actually it gathers expertise from across sectors, coming from research charities, private industry, European National Trade Association, patients and consumer group. And we are actually organizing next week, the 27th of November in Brussels, an event on regenerative medicine. So for those who would be interested, I would be really happy to provide some additional information at the end of this session. So I was invited because indeed I represent the FEAM, so the Federation European Academies of Medicine, but also because I'm a molecular biologist and I hold a PhD in biomedical and pharmaceutical science, all from the UCL University of Brussels, in which I have been extensively working in cell therapy and regenerative medicine. going a little bit more in details, during my PhD, I have been working mainly with mesenchymal stem cells. I have been working differentiating them in insulin-producing cells to specifically use them in the field of type 1 diabetes. Whereas immediately after my PhD, during my 3 years of postdoc, I have been working in a private biotech company in Belgium, in which I have continued my study in regenerative medicine. I have been working with liver-derived mesenchymal stem cells in research and development department, and I have been working preparing cells for transplantation in patients that needed liver organs, liver transplantation. So without going again in the details, since the other speakers already described a little bit what it is, the regenerative medicine, there are several ways with which we could restore tissue function, as has been already said, by using stem cells, with the gene therapy, in vivo reprogramming, with the new upcoming tissues in January, so with the scaffold, 3D bioprinting, with the organoids, and with new generation drugs and small molecule. So far, there are a lot of clinical trials ongoing that are trying to use stem cells and in the field of regenerative medicine to be applied across a wide range of organ disease, coming from the neurodegenerative disease, for example, diabetes and liver, which I have been working on, heart diseases, and also skin, especially, which is a field that is going out kind of quickly. So we have been listening from previous presentation, mainly which have been the challenges from the ethical point of view, which has been discussed in this joint statement FIM-ISAC. Whereas when I have been invited to provide some key points on this presentation, I have been thinking to provide instead two main challenges that from my point of view, so from a scientist perspective, I have been encountered during my brief career, I will say. The first one, which is kind of a major issue, is the clinical variability that we have each time that we produce mesenchymal stem cells, which is a variability that is not only donor-to-donor dependent, it also depends from the difference between the batches that we produce. So from the same kind of cells that we produce, there have been, we have been observing variability using same type of cells, same population, but it was divided in several batches. So this means that this problem, it may be due also to manufacturing, transporting, and freezing and thawing processes. The second issue is instead the long-term safety concern. But okay, this second issue might be somehow overcome by we design maybe in vivo or also clinical trials with a long-term vision, whereas the first one, the first issue, which is the clinical variability, might be in part be somehow overcome by following precise good laboratory practice and good manufacturing practice. So we need to have strict regulation in the way we produce these cells and these batches. So some of these issues has been mentioned in the statements, together with other issues from the ethical parts, but since we are a little bit out of time, so I will leave it like this, and I will be happy to discuss all these details further with the panel, with the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask the speakers to take a seat here, and please come here, take a seat, and then we will open the discussion, and I'm sure there are enough questions to be answered. Who is the first one from the audience? Please.
Hi, I'm Dr. Onubama. I'm a medical health researcher. My question is open to all the panelists, and I would like to ask, since there are a lot of uncertainties around this issue. Is there a system installed for continuous input from different stakeholders so that we can better frame our decisions for future?
We have some microphones here. Who would like to give an answer to this question? This is not so important. Give me another microphone. We have only one there. Excuse me. What was the question? I couldn't hear it.
Thank you. It's better now. The question was, is there some way of securing continuous input from the different stakeholders? And what I wanted to say is that I was too quick with my fingers because I skipped a couple of slides that dealt with that question. I think we need to have a continuous dialogue with the various stakeholders. And if you go for zero risk, there's no progress. So the precautionary principle is somewhat dangerous in this context because it requires no risk and it puts the burden of proof on those who want to introduce a change. And in my slides I had a different principle which I call the principle of proportionality, which requires the four conditions are met. And these four conditions are the importance of objective, the relevance of the means, the most favorable option, and non-excessiveness. And all these can be interpreted in different ways, and they need to be interpreted by the dialogue over a period of time. And then that suggests an approach which I would like to call stewardship. So you continuously see what's happening, how the evidence is changing. Also the values in society change over time. And when there are changes, nothing is written in stone. You can then revise your recommendations. And that's also relevant for Anne's point, that sometimes you come too late, sometimes you are too negative. If we have something like I was advocating with this continuous dialogue with the various stakeholders on the relevance of the evidence and the relevance of the various values, we could avoid that problem of coming too late or becoming too strict. And we should not be fixed on the principle of the precautionary principle, because that would stop progress. And we know from the history of medicine that some calculated risks have been necessary in order to secure progress and in order to help future patients.
I can add maybe something for this question, which is there is a role for Europe for that, because if decisions are by country for a number of things, putting up a mechanism of sharing experience and of that can help in all different countries, that is feasible and in accordance with the competencies of Europe.
She would like to answer.
Thank you. Also, just a quick comment. Actually, also at the Federation European Academies of Medicine, we have this forum platform, which is basically gather a little bit stakeholders, European stakeholders from industries, as I was saying before, patients and consumer groups and research charities. And actually, anytime that there is some European issue that needs to be discussed, like this one that is coming out for the regenerative medicine, we try to organize meetings and events, inviting also people from the European Commission, from the EMA, to try to make them to speak also with patients, not only with the scientists, with researchers. So I think it's also up to us to keep going, tracking, writing statements, and
Might I just add to Elisa's very good point about the exact objective of the theme forum to do exactly what you asked. Of course, academies at the national level often also have a very strong convening function in bringing together different stakeholders from across the scientific community, patient groups, for example, industry, and so on. So the work that FEAM and ESAC are doing at a regional level is expanded and sustained by follow-up at the national level through the academy system.
I would just add that, of course, these discussions with different stakeholders are very welcome and very well organized at the European level, but it would be also necessary to also elevate to a global level discussion, and this forum is a global forum, but there would be more such occasions.
I would like to mention that it's an interesting problem at the European Medicines Association, at the Committee for Advanced Therapies, because practically all the industry people are not there, and because of conflict of interest. So all the members of this committee are either research scientists or clinicians or regulators, but the other part is not present. And it's a continuous discussion. How could we get involved the industry in these discussions? And probably the European Commission should be interested in this kind of question to have these committees to turn towards helping the industry in this regard. Thank you.
Well, we heard from Balázs Zakadi that this is a misuse of using stem cells for therapy, in particular in the US and I think in Japan. And my question is how it is possible that in Japan, where you have the FDA, it's such strict regulation that there is, as you mentioned, over 200 clinics where, using this, taking cells from the patient, treating it in the laboratory, and giving it back. How is this possible? And how can we protect ourselves here in Europe?
I think right now we cannot, because there is a continuous discussion between the EMA, CAT, and the FDA, and the FDA says that they try to regulate these clinics, but they cannot really do it. First of all, because these are at individual states, which have different regulations. And although there is a national regulation by the FDA, they could still use this kind of approach as an industrial approach, as a health approach, and the different states have different regulations in this regard. And actually now the Trump doctrine is that let all the business grow. And so it's very much contradicting the efforts of FDA, and that's a very strong internal discussion now in the US, whether they should allow to grow these clinics or they should closely regulate them, and it's really not resolved right now.
All right, just a footnote to this. There are two things that need to be added. First, much of the information from these clinics are spread via internet, and of course internet is difficult to regulate nationally. Secondly, you must consider the situation of parents who are in a desperate situation. Their children are dying from cancer, and you get these advertisements via the internet which promise more than they can deliver. But of course, there are many cases of parents that sell their houses in order to hopefully save the life of their kids. And you cannot, it's very difficult, psychologically to criticize them, because if you have experienced the death of a son or a daughter, you will understand their motivation. So these, it's very difficult to regulate this, and it has to do with the internet and desperate parents.
Yeah. Would you like to make a comment?
return to the self-regulation of science, because in the fields of science, if the findings are unjustified, they cannot be replicated, then it turns out, and then the scientific world will not accept. And this holds true also for this procedure. So after a while, it will turn out that they are useless. However, of course, regulation is possible, would be better.
There is one aspect which can be addressed by the public institutions, which is about information. And of course, there are moments when you are the desperate parent, so that's not the good moment to tell you don't trust them. But more generally speaking, there is a responsibility for public institutions and maybe academy and to really provide validated information on different aspects and to take caution, so that can help at least.
May I just add that the International Society for Stem Cell Research has made a very important contribution to this effect. They have published a patient handbook listing the questions that the patient should ask, and they have also in policy statement criticized these unregulated stem cell clinics and the promises that they make without any foundation. So the International Society for Stem Cell Research has really done a lot in the direction of what you want, Anne.
You were telling us that the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems, is the risk-benefit analysis. Is there some sort of guidance for this? How one actually comes then to the conclusion this is a benefit, and benefit, is outdoing the risk?
No, I think the first step is to be aware of the two components, the probability of a certain outcome and the negative value of that outcome. And then we discussed with the various stakeholders what are the evidence, of the probability, of the likelihood that a certain adverse events will take place. And we also discussed the values. Some attach a big value, others a smaller value to a certain event. We cannot assume that the stakeholders are uniform or homogeneous. So that's why we want to have this ongoing dialogue with the various stakeholders and to make sure, because a technique that used to be very risky and dangerous due to new knowledge is much safer. So we need to be aware of what's happening in the scientific landscape. And this is not static. Things change, both concerning risk evaluation and concerning values.
When I recall in medicine, when one started to do liver transplantation, and kidney transplantation, I'm sure this was not done with all these, concerns we have today with all modern technologies. And how did we do it at that time when I was in medical school, when we discussed this, can you do this or not do this, not knowing enough about HLA and compatibility and all these things?
That's why I said if we look at the history of medicine, we can learn that things have, been tried. And when Barnard made his first heart transplant, people died. Now it's a very routine procedure. That's why I advocated don't go for the precautionary principle, because that would halt progress. Use the principle of proportionality instead and have an ongoing dialogue of the importance of the objective, the excessiveness, and the relevance of the means and all the other things I mentioned. There's no simple solution. We have to have an ongoing dialogue, and the evidence changes, and we need to discuss that and agree on what's the best for the most people.
There is a clinician, hematologist at the Committee for Advanced Therapies, and he said at one discussion, if we were the regulators at the time of stem cell transplantation, there would be no transplantation even until now. And that was probably true, because if we could keep all the regulatory aspects, at that time, bone marrow transplantation was practically a lethal method, 50 to 70% of the patients died at the first attempts. And now it's a routine procedure with practically no losses of patients. So time will make these methods improve, and regulators have to follow very carefully, I think.
Yeah.
Add something about the precautionary principle. There are different ways of considering the precaution, which is one which is freezing activity, and another one which is to act with caution and to survey and follow up what's going on and so on. So I think that there is not one way of considering the precautionary principle, that acting with caution is something that is reasonable.
Sorry, I would like just to add another comment, a quick one, related to the risk and benefit question that you have made. Indeed, I have been working in this company in which we were producing cells for patients with liver disease, and just to give an idea of how difficult it can be sometimes to predict, to have an idea of what it can happen. We had we had an episode in which we have transplanted 4 patients, all with the same batches of cells that we have prepared. 3 of them, they basically just had they had important benefits from this. So they, after 24 hours, they were already feeling better. Let's say all the parameters from the liver were improving, whereas one of out of 4 basically had severe collateral effect, which we were not expecting actually, and this patient died in fact. And so I would like this was just an example just to say how difficult it is predict, because we do not have at this stage, I think, enough knowledge. We need to work on it.
Okay. I look at my watch. I think we have finished our 1.5 hour. I don't see any additional question anymore. And I would say we close this and give an applause to the speakers who have done such a wonderful way in explaining to us the difficulties in this area. Thank you very much.
Well, all the British people, not just me, because tomorrow our chief scientist from the Foreign Office is giving a plenary report. I'm not sure she realises there won't be much of an audience.